Let's journey back to June 1987, the week of the release of The Ultimate Evil by Maury Terry. Roanoke Times and World News, Sunday, June 28, 1987. Son of Sam threat persists 10 years later. New book says confessed killer, part of satanic cult linked to Charles Manson by Wendy Lin. It has been 10 years since the so-called Son of Sam terrorized the streets of New York. But now, a new book claims that the danger didn't end when David Berkowitz was arrested as the .44 caliber killer. Berkowitz was only one member of a nationwide satanic cult that pulled the trigger on 13 young victims in Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. According to The Ultimate Evil by Maury Terry, a former newspaper reporter and freelance writer, to be released this week by Doubleday. The cult is linked to the Charles Manson family, the book says, and is responsible for several more murders, including the gruesome killing of a North Dakota newlywed in a California church, the murder of Long Island impresario Roy Radin, and the shooting death of the real son of Sam Carr. Carr was Berkowitz's neighbor in Yonkers and the owner of the dog that Berkowitz claimed was possessed by demons and had ordered him to kill. The theory is disturbing and sometimes incredible, but is supported by Queens District Attorney John J. Santucci, Manhattan Attorney Harry Lipsig, who represented two of the Son of Sam victims in a civil suit against Berkowitz, and several North Dakota police investigators. Lipsig, who represented victims Salvatore Lupo and Robert Violante, is expected to call for the police to reopen the case during a press conference at the publisher's office Thursday. Also scheduled to attend are Nasa Moskowitz, the mother of shooting victim Stacy Moskowitz, former Lieutenant Terry Gardner, the North Dakota police officer who headed the investigation into the death of Sam Carr's son, and Charles Hamilton, a handwriting expert who has said that the Son of Sam letters written to police and to columnist Jimmy Breslin were not penned by Berkowitz. Queens, where 5 of the Son of Sam attacks occurred, is the only jurisdiction where the case is still under investigation. And although Santucci doesn't subscribe entirely to the theory of the satanic cult, he is convinced that Berkowitz did not act alone. At the point Berkowitz pleaded guilty, there was no reason to question it, Santucci said in a recent interview. But we always had some gaps in the case. There were flaws in the descriptions and questions about being certain places at certain times. Santucci reopened his investigation in 1978 after receiving a letter from a prisoner who claimed to have information about the case. The prisoner, whom Santucci would not name, insisted that Santucci visit him in prison. He did. It was a day that is not easily forgotten, Santucci said. It took me to a whole new backdrop and introduced a whole new angle of the story, one that could explain away all the gaps. The new angle, which is explored in detail in Terry's book, begins with the death of John Carr. In February 1978, 5 months after Berkowitz's arrest, Sam Carr's oldest son was discovered shot to death in Minot, North Dakota. It was never determined whether the shooting was a murder or a suicide. Then in October 1978, Carr's younger son, Michael, was killed in a one-car accident on Manhattan's West Side. Evidence uncovered by Terry, including interviews with people who knew the Carr brothers, indicated that both of them dabbled in the occult and were far more familiar with Berkowitz than was originally suspected. Following a trail of clues laid out in interviews and correspondence with Berkowitz and in interviews with other sources, Terry claims that The Son of Sam killings were conducted by a satanic cult based in New York City and nearby Westchester County. Berkowitz was a member of the cult and pulled the trigger on two Son of Sam shootings in the Bronx: the killing of Donna Loria and wounding of Jody Valenti, and the killings of Valentina Siriani and Alexander Esau. Two other shootings, Carl Denaro and Virginia Voskerichian in Queens, were carried out by female members of the cult. One of the murders in Queens was carried out by a man from the West Coast known as Manson II, who was so named for his association with the Charles Manson family. The murder in Brooklyn of Stacy Moskowitz, the last Son of Sam victim, was carried out for the purpose of making a video of the killing for a snuff film. The Moskowitz snuff film was made for Long Island impresario Roy Radin, who had a reputation for debauchery. Radin was killed by cult members over disagreements concerning business dealings. Terry also claims to have discovered physical evidence of cult activity, sites near the Berkowitz and Carr homes where devil worship rituals were carried out and were marked off by satanic symbols, he says. Dead animals, mostly German shepherds, were found strangled and slaughtered in a park nearby. In the course of Terry's 10-year research into the case, he traded information with several law enforcement agencies, including the offices of Santucci and Nassau County District Attorney Dennis Dillon. Terry is critical of the New York City Police Department, which he accuses of having covered up evidence that discredits its lone gunman theory. Berkowitz could have told them he sunk the Lusitania and they would have bought it, Terry said in a recent interview. They bought it because they wanted to buy it. They knew ahead of time it was wrong, but they had committed themselves to the lone gunman theory. Although the Son of Sam type slaying stopped with the arrest of Berkowitz, Terry said the cult has continued to commit other sorts of murders across the country. New York City police officials who worked on the case strongly disagree with Terry's assessment of it. Even after Berkowitz was arrested, we looked into the possibility of an accomplice, said Joe Coffey, who was one of the leaders of the investigation. When we were done, we were convinced that there was no one else. To this moment, I am convinced of it. Coffey, who retired from the police department and is now a member of the New York State Organized Crime Task Force, remembers the most minute details of the case. He said he followed leads that Terry offered, but they never panned out. Coffey even went to Minot, North Dakota, but we disproved and eliminated every one of his so-called theories. One of Terry's sources, Coffey said, was a city police officer once suspected of being the .44 caliber killer himself. As far as I'm concerned, that story is totally based on speculation and started by a New York City detective who was originally a suspect and we deemed as a psychotic at the very least. As for the Manson connection, an expert on the Manson family says, I don't find that to be a credible theory, Stephen Kay, Deputy District Attorney for Los Angeles County, says. There are a lot of people who would like to be members of the Manson family. I understand satanic worshippers hold him up in high esteem, but I've never heard of anything like that from any of them. Detectives who investigated the shooting death of Roy Radin were surprised to hear of Terry's claim. I don't like the idea, said Los Angeles County Sheriff Department Sergeant Charles Stoner. It doesn't sound like anything we've come up with. Everything in our investigation shows another direction, other than cult. Radin's body was found near Los Angeles in 1983. Santucci visited with an inmate who was able to fill in the gaps for him. Coffey traveled out to Minot, North Dakota to investigate the cult angle. Police officer was a suspect who was deemed psychotic. I found this archive very interesting, and I hope that you did too. Thanks for listening.